YouTube, it's ValleyGirl5678 here, and it's finally time for my top 20 albums of 2022 video. Very exciting stuff. Let's get into it. So like I said, it is top 20 albums of the year, but there were a lot of good albums that came out in 2022. I've got to say 2022 was a pretty good year for music. But yeah, since there's only 20 albums, 20 top albums of 2022, in this video I decided to add 5 honorable mentions in no particular order, just to give them a little shout out, you know. Starting with Dragon New Warm Mountain, I Believe in You from Big Thief. This is an incredible indie folk album. It's just incredibly long. I think it's actually a double album. Next is The Car by the Arctic Monkeys. This is like a nice, chill, almost literary Alex Turner sleigh. Next is Being Funny in a Foreign Language by the 1975. I don't know what to say other than Matt Healy has won me over. So I look forward to seeing where that takes me. Might be concerning. Next is the Slut Pop. I know this was technically an EP, but Slut Pop by Kim Petras. This is an incredibly slay gay EP, but unfortunately it is produced by an incredibly unslay man. And last but not least, we have Surrender by Miss Maggie Rogers. Alright, so now we're getting into the nitty gritty. Coming in at number 20 is Sometimes Forever by Soccer Mommy. When an artist has like a blonde-esque moment with an album release, kind of like Sophie, Soccer Mommy, did in 2020 with Color Theory, the best and only effective option, in my opinion, is to follow it up with something that has like remnants and callbacks to the previous iconic work, but is ultimately something completely new for the artist. Kind of like how SZA followed up Control, 5 years later, but still, with SOS, which I'll obviously get to. Sophie did just that here, with a body of work that does not shy away from the themes, motifs, and ideas that Sophie thrives with artistically, but she's doing so in a sonically different way that almost calls back to her roots of grungy, angsty instrumentation vibes, while also calling towards the future of the genre that she is in. Number 19 is Laurel Hell from Mitski herself. Mitski is Mitskiing here, as she always does, but it's definitely in a different way than in her previous LP, Be the Cowboy from 2018, which was one of the best, if not the best, albums of 2018. Obviously, Laurel Hell is not the best album of 2022, and that's fine. Like I said, she's still Mitskiing. She'll never stop Mitskiing. But here it's just a bit more in an autobiographical way. Number 18 is Fasora, I think is how you pronounce it. Let me know if I'm wrong. By Bjork. Here we see Bjork leaving behind some of her more majestic and utopian aesthetics and ideals of her past few LPs for aesthetics and ideas and ideals and whatever that are much more based in reality, this seemingly being caused by her mother's death. Yet even in the darkness, Bjork's genius, quirky light shines through, especially with the interludes that feel like, to me, like the choir at Hogwarts. Okay, number 17 is Ants from Up There by Black Country New Road. This is like the progressive rock album of 2022. Period. It has gorgeous experimental instrumentation, broodingly satisfying vocal performances from now ex-leading man Isaac Wood, with the cherry on top of very thought-provoking lyrics. It'll be really interesting to see where the band's sound goes now that obviously Isaac Wood has left the band. I heard through the grapevine that the girlies will be singing now, which I love. Number 16 is Janky Star by Grace Ives. I think Grace is one of the biggest people to watch in music right now across the genres. This record has some of the crispiest progressive pop tracks of the year, from the production to Grace's pen. Okay, and number 15 is Serpentina by Banks. As I said in my top 30 songs of the year video, Banks is severely underrated. She has such a unique yet consistent sound that she's been exploring for about a full decade now, publicly on the internet. And this album just really represents that to me because so many of the tracks on this album are so fresh and so 2022, but then at the same time are still fairly cohesive with, her debut album from 2014, Goddess. She shows her sonic range on this album more than I think she has done in the past, yet it's still incredibly sonically cohesive. From the alternative pop and R&B bops to the ballads. She has such a strong sense of self and aesthetic. I just think she's one of the best doing it right now, but I feel like a a lot of people aren't noticing. Alrighty, number 14 is Pre-Pleasure by Julia Jacklin. Julia Jacklin is Australia's prime millennial singer-songwriter, and she's at it again with her second full-length LP following 2019's Crushing, which has, incredible tracks on it, such as Body, Don't Know How to Keep Loving You, Pressure to Party. So yeah, she's at it again, but this time with a bit more retrospect. With that first LP, Crushing, she explored the problems of love and heartbreak. But in Pre-Pleasure, she's exploring what problems and hardships come up when she is actually, deeply in love. Those being, in Julia's case, obviously, repressed religious trauma. She walks us throughout the album how she was told/shown to engage with religion as a child has affected her ability to be completely open emotionally and physically with her partner when she gets to a point of ultimate trust and care and love in a relationship. But yeah, this album, it's a huge indie slay, and I have honestly fathomed things about it that I did not fathom at the time I initially reviewed the album. And yeah, I also think that Julia Jacklin's incredibly underrated. Duh. Okay, number 13 is Hold the Girl from Rina Sawayama. Generally, in this album, Rina engages with contemplating and confronting organized religion's impact on childhood and therefore life, similarly to Pre-Pleasure by Julia Jacklin. But these two bodies of work are obviously done from completely different lenses in different countries, in different styles. I think that Rina is one of the freshest and most important voices in pop right now, and nothing really exemplifies this better than this album. While on the surface level, this album seems less autobiographical and personal than her debut, Sawayama, because it was literally called Sawayama, her last name. But it's actually quite the opposite. Throughout this album, Rina engages with her younger self in order to fully and completely shed the harmful realities of her recent past and present. The album isn't overproduced a hair, and compared to Sawayama, it's actually quite stripped back, which makes space for her vocals and what she's saying in those vocals to take center stage, which is, I think, the point of this album. Can't wait to see what she does next. I love this woman. Okay, we're getting close to the top 10. Number 12 is And in the Darkness, Hearts Aglow by Wise Blood. Now, while this album was a late 2022 release, it really does feel like a pandemic era album, which technically, we're still in or whatever. I don't know. At this point, I'm just but it feels like a pandemic album because of its very strong theme of communal general trauma and life and humanity itself. And, I often talk about thematically cohesive albums and sonically cohesive albums, and it's very possible for an album to be both thematically cohesive and sonically cohesive, or one or the other, or neither or whatever. But you rarely get an album where the thematic cohesion and sonic cohesion are cohesive to each other, if that makes sense. The combo of Natalie's tragically beautiful lyrics and truthfully very emotionally exhausted vocals, the new age production that simultaneously feels like calling back to almost the 70s, makes for one of the most existential yet comforting albums of the year. Number 11 is Nymph by Shy Girl. Shy Girl is another British alt girl slaying the game. Now, I will admit, this is definitely not the best mixed album of the year, but in many ways, it actually aids to the sonic aesthetic, which makes me think that, a lot of it was intentional. The technically lazy mixing kind of goes perfectly with her grimy yet fierce and cool melodies and vocal performances. So I'm kind of here for it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a 24-year-old hyperpop stan, and if that's the case, then, Nevertheless, the album is incredibly thematically and sonically cohesive, and I just love this as a debut album for her, and I can't wait to see what she does going forward. Okay, we're in the top 10! Number 10 is Florist by Florist. This album is a collection of lyrically deep yet soft indie folk tracks layered with melancholic instrumental interludes that makes for the perfect album for a rainy day. The interludes yearn just as deeply as her melodies and lyrics and vocal performances, which is what makes the album such a melancholic experience. Number 9 is The Loneliest Time by Carly Rae Jepsen. Carly Rae Jepsen is insanely underrated. She has done so much for pop, and people do not give her the credit she deserves whatsoever. And this album is the definition of an album that complements itself as a body of work more than the individual tracks do. She is the queen of synth pop, and she's at it again with this quite vulnerable and indulgent body of work that sounds like the sonic representation of like blissful, beachy melancholy. It was a melancholic year in 2022. But do I think melancholy is out for 2023? No. All right, so number 8 is I by Licky Lee. This album almost feels like a concept album, given how solid the aesthetic of the album is as a whole. From the content of the album itself to the fact that the album is 33 minutes and 33 seconds long. Every song leads into the next so beautifully, so perfectly, similarly to Renaissance, but in a much sadder white girl way. All of the production, instrumentation, melodies, vocal performances, all of the music on this album will break your heart. All right, number 7 is Beatopia by Beabadoobie. For me personally, this is like insanely close to a perfect indie rock album. Like, the tracks on here are so solid. Like, every song slaps. And it's also a huge improvement from her 2020 album. And like, she's only 22. I cannot wait to see where she goes from here. I'm absolutely obsessed, saw it, all of the above. Number 6 is Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick Lamar. Okay, so let me say this whole sentence before you react, okay? This album is worse than his previous 3 LPs, in my opinion, but it's Kendrick, so his worst is still better than most people's best. I'm sorry, I say it like it is. I'm here to tell you the truth. I mean, N95, Father Time, Rich Spirit, We Cried Together, which is like a piece of fine art, Silent Hill, obviously The Heart Part 5, my number 1 song of 2022. And I mean, Auntie Diaries got people talking about one of the most pressing issues in American culture right now, which is transphobia. And the song itself was for sure an expression of someone slowly but surely unlearning the innate transphobia that most people have. And like, talking is the first step. Okay, we're in the top 5. Number 5 is Capra Songs by my girl FK Twigs. Where is she? Nope. I absolutely love the idea of an album with the aesthetic and structure of a mixtape. Some of the freshest songs of the year on this thing, such as Light Beamers, Darjeeling, and Which Way, as well as some of the biggest alternative pop and R&B bops of the year, with iconic features such as Tears in the Club feat The Weeknd, Poppy Bones feat Shy Girl, and you cannot forget Jealousy feat Rema. Like, oh my god, that song. Not to mention the music video series. And I know she's like big, kind of, but like, she is highly, severely underrated. Speaking of iconic pop girlies, number 4 is Crash by Charli XCX. In many ways, this album feels like a culmination of sorts on her impact on pop that led to the development of hyperpop and then some. This isn't a hyperpop record. This is a Charli XCX record, and a perfect one at that. And it's one of the strongest concept albums I've heard / seen in a while. The concept literally just being crash, destruction. Ugh, it's so good. Number 3 is Renaissance by Beyonce. This is a stellar dance record from Queen Bee that finds her continuing on the path that she started on with Lemonade in 2016, in the sense of connecting with her innermost roots for creative inspiration instead of her more on the surface level qualities and experiences, etc., that she'd pretty much stuck to since her debut solo album in 2003. I mean, of course, everything she made before Lemonade was fantastic, iconic, never been done before, all of that. But an album like Renaissance for Beyonce, an album solely inspired by queer POC art and its history, has the power to not just open more creative doors for her, but open doors more generally in the culture, because she has that power. And that's just fucking iconic. Alright, so we are at the top 2. These 2 albums are basically tied. The deal breaker was length, so I'm sure you figured out that my number 2 album is SOS by SZA. This is probably the most robust album of the year, with SZA showcasing her most vulnerable thoughts and feelings through nuanced and existential lyricism, her best vocal performances to date, and her ability to create a versatile body of work that is also incredibly succinct, cohesive, and engaging. For an album with 23 songs on it, like, it should not be that engaging. Do I think a couple tracks could have been cut? Yes. The Phoebe Bridgers song just potentially saved the world. I love the Travis Scott feature. But yeah, so my number one is Midnight's, obviously. And the deal breaker was really that the original main album of Midnight's is 13 tracks, and then the deluxe version, the 3am track version, whatever, has 8 tracks if you're including Hits Different, which is the gayest song she's ever produced. But not on streaming services. It's too gay for streaming services. That is ultimately what made me decide to give Midnight's the number one spot, and also, you know, it's very on brand for me, so. I mean, it was the biggest release of the year. It broke so many records. The concept is so unique and, like, specific, and is just sonically cohesive enough that it's sonically cohesive, but not too much where all the songs sound the same. The album is so well flushed out from the content of the album itself and its aesthetic as a whole, to her managing to come out of the closet without doing the whole coming out fiasco, which would ultimately, you know, at least stall her career, because that would be the only thing people would be able to talk about for like 5 years afterwards. If you want to hear what my ranking of Midnight's, including the 3am tracks, are, that ranking is at the end of my 3am tracks review video. But yeah, so those are my top 20 albums of 2022. Can't wait to see what this new year brings. There's so much to look forward to. Please remember to hit that subscribe button as well as the like button. I did make a playlist of my favorite songs from each of these albums, including the honorable mentions, and it's linked below alongside my TikTok and my silly little Instagram for this account, or this brand, I should say. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my first review of 2023.